Night fell on the forest, shrouding everything in a dense shroud of darkness. The air was fresh, saturated with the smell of pine needles and earth. A campfire crackled in the distance, around which a small group of people were sitting. They laughed, exchanged stories and fried food on the fire, enjoying rare moments of solitude from the hustle and bustle of the city. Among them were three friends, Mark, Logan and Jessica. They had known each other since college, but after graduation they each went their separate ways. Logan moved to another city, Jessica got a job at a large company, and Mark stayed in his hometown. However, once a year they got together to spend a weekend in nature, as they used to do. "Hey, Mark, didn't you say that you know the local legend?" Jessica asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Come on," he grinned. "There's nothing special about these places. It's just a forest, wild nature and, sometimes, strange things." Logan chuckled. "Oh, that's interesting. Come on, spit it out." Mark threw a branch on the fire and looked towards the trees. "Okay, but don't tell me you're scared. Anyway, a few years ago, a group of tourists disappeared here. We searched for them for a long time, but we never found them. Tents, things, even food remained in place, but there was no sign of people." Jessica raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And you're saying it has something to do with us?" "Of course not," Mark shrugged. "I just thought you might be interested." Logan laughed. "It would be interesting if you said that they walk through the forest and hunt for new victims." "Well, if that makes you feel better, then so be it," Mark grinned. They continued the conversation, but after a few minutes, Jessica noticed something strange. "Hey, guys," she said softly, peering into the darkness. "What?" Logan asked. "Don't you think it's getting too quiet?" Mark looked around. She was right. The forest, which was usually filled with the sounds of crickets and birds at night, fell into an eerie silence. Even the bonfire seemed to burn quieter, as if something was pressing on the air around it. "Maybe the owls just stopped talking," Logan suggested, but there was tension in his voice. "Or someone nearby," Jessica whispered. They looked at each other, and Mark quickly reached into his backpack, pulling out a flashlight. "Let's see what's in there," he suggested. "Are you crazy?" Logan grabbed his arm. "If there's someone there, wouldn't it be better to stay here? If there's an animal out there, it's better to know where it is," Mark replied and switched on the flashlight. A ray of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees and bushes. Nothing happened for a few seconds, but then, in the distance, at the edge of the clearing, something flashed. They froze. Mark slowly raised the lantern higher, but did not have time to say anything. There was a sound in the woods behind them. Crackling. It was as if someone had stepped on a dry branch. Jessica swallowed hard. Logan clenched his hands into fists. "Damn," he whispered. "It's not an animal." Mark gritted his teeth, feeling a chill run down his spine. Someone was nearby. And he knew they were here. Mark slowly turned towards the sound, trying not to make any sudden movements. His fingers tightened on the flashlight, and the light ran through the trees, picking out gnarled trunks and tangled bushes from the darkness. The crash came again, closer. It wasn't the rustle of leaves or the crackle of falling branches. No. These were confident steps. Someone was walking, breaking twigs and dry leaves underfoot, as if deliberately not trying to be unnoticed. "Who's there?" Mark asked hoarsely, feeling his heart thumping in his chest. There was no response. Jessica sucked in a quiet breath through her teeth, clutching the metal mug in her hand so that her knuckles turned white. Logan slowly bent down to the ground and picked up a heavy stick. His face no longer expressed mockery, but only concentration and fear. "Maybe they're tourists." Jessica tried to justify herself, but her voice faltered. "What the hell kind of tourists?" Logan whispered, not taking his eyes off the darkness. Mark took a step forward, shining the light further. And then he saw it. A silhouette could be seen between the trees, about 20 meters away from them. Tall. Hunched over. Human. But he didn't move. He just stood there. "Hey!" Mark shouted, trying to sound confident. "Who are you?" The silhouette did not respond. He didn't move. "Maybe he can't hear us," Jessica whispered. "Or he doesn't want to hear it," Logan muttered. Time seemed to freeze. It took a few seconds before Mark realized something was wrong. This man, he was standing too strangely. Unnatural. His head was slightly tilted to the side, and his shoulders were tense, as if he was listening. "We need to get out of here," Logan said through gritted teeth. But as soon as he said that, the figure took a step forward. The muffled crunch of branches underfoot rang out in the eerie silence. They could see him better now. He was wearing simple clothes, dark trousers, a jacket, but his face was not visible. "We're armed," Mark said sharply, clutching the flashlight in his hand. "We're calling the police." But the man didn't stop. One more step. The sound of twigs crunching hurt my ears. Jessica put her hand to her mouth convulsively. Logan tensed, ready to fight or run. Mark raised his hand with the flashlight higher, but suddenly, the light started flashing. "Damn it!" He hit the body several times, but the flashlight continued to flicker, illuminating the figure in front of them in uneven flashes. And then they saw. The stranger had no shoes. His bare feet, covered with dirt and abrasions, looked as if he had been walking in the woods for weeks. But that wasn't the worst part. He kept walking. Step. One more step. Logan gripped the stick sharply, ready to strike, but suddenly, the man stopped. This time, Mark noticed how his chest was heaving, as if he was barely holding his breath. A few seconds of silence. And then, the figure slowly turned its head to the side. Not at them. A little further. Into the forest. Back to where they came from. "He's not alone," Jessica whispered. And that was the moment when the real panic began to roll in. Logan looked around frantically. Mark pressed his fingers into the flashlight so that they began to hurt. The stranger stood silently. And then, he did something they never expected. He just turned around and left. Not into the woods, not away from them. He left in the direction of their tents. And with every step, a crackling sound could be heard in the distance again. It was as if someone else was moving in the dark. Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Let's run," he whispered. But they didn't know which way. They froze like deer in the headlights. No one wanted to be the first to make a move. My gut instinct told me that any move could be fatal. Logan was the first to come out of his stupor. He abruptly turned around and, almost without making any sounds, moved back. Towards the car, he hissed. Jessica nodded and grabbed Mark's arm. Their camp was only a couple hundred meters away, but those meters now seemed endless. Step. One more step. The crunching of branches underfoot seemed louder than the beating of a heart. Something moved behind them. But no one looked back. Mark slowed down when he was almost at the tents. Logan glared at him. "Why are you up?" Mark raised his hand, gesturing for silence. He peered intently into the dark space between the trees. "There's something here." He didn't finish. The moon, coming out from behind the clouds, illuminated the clearing. And then they saw. The tents were torn up. Things are scattered on the ground. The pot with the leftovers is overturned. But the worst part is, someone's bare footprints going into the depths of the forest. Lots of footprints. They weren't alone. "Damn," Jessica gasped. She grabbed her backpack without even checking what was inside and rushed to the car. Logan didn't hesitate either. Mark paused for a moment, looking around as if trying to grasp something important. But at that moment, the sound came again. Somewhere nearby, just a few meters away, someone took a step. The crunch. Then another one. Someone was coming out of the shadows of the trees. They couldn't wait any longer. Mark turned around and rushed to the car. Jessica was already banging on the door. "Open it." Logan frantically pulled out the keys, but his fingers were shaking. Behind them, the crunching grew louder. Mark looked over his shoulder. A silhouette appeared out of the darkness. That's the one. But now there were others behind him. A lot. The headlights flashed on, illuminating a dozen barefoot figures standing among the trees. They were all watching. And none of them moved. The car started the first time. Logan slammed on the gas pedal. The tires screeched, and the car took off. But before they left the clearing, Mark looked back again. They did not follow them. Everyone just stood there. They were watching. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. It wasn't until they reached a dirt road and the figures disappeared into the trees that he finally said, "Who was that?" "I don't care," Logan breathed, not relaxing his grip on the steering wheel. "The main thing is that we left." But Jessica remained silent. She was looking at her phone. Her hands were shaking. "What?" Mark asked. She turned the screen around. Photo. Taken just a few minutes ago, while they were still at the tents. The picture was blurry, but there were many more people standing in the shade of the trees behind their camp than they had seen at the last moment. They've been there all this time. We just waited. We waited for them to notice them. The car flew along the broken dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. The headlights picked out sparse trees and roadside signs from the darkness, but the landscape was monotonous and seemed endless. Neither of them said a word. Even Logan, who usually couldn't keep his mouth shut, just gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. Were they ordinary people? She sounded like she didn't believe her own question. Logan snorted. "Have you seen them?" "Damn it, Jess, they came out of the woods barefoot in the middle of the night." "Yes, but they didn't attack us," she said carefully. "Because we noticed them," Mark muttered. He looked out the window, but he didn't see the road, but that clearing, their tents, and the shadows watching from the woods. Logan slammed on the steering wheel. "We don't even know how many of them were there." Jessica looked at her phone again. She zoomed in on the photo. Now it became clear, the figures were standing not only behind the tents, but also among the trees, to the left and to the right. Around. They were surrounded. Mark clutched his head. "We need to go to the police." "And say what?" Logan made an exasperated sound. "Oh, officer, there were some barefoot morons in the woods looking at us, please figure it out." "They were watching us, Logan." Mark exploded. "So what? They're crazy sectarians, forest bums, I don't know shit. The main thing is that we got out." But Mark shook his head. "You don't understand anything." He looked up. "They didn't find us." Logan's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "We're the ones who came to where they live." The salon was silent again. Jessica automatically stroked the edge of her jacket, as if checking if it was still there. "And then I noticed it. Spot. Dark. On her sleeve." She raised it to her eyes. "Maroon brown. Dried blood." My heart clenched in my chest. She remembered that when she was packing her backpack, grabbing her clothes, she came across something wet, but in her haste she didn't pay attention. Jessica slowly picked up her phone and turned on the flashlight. She shone the light on the backpack. At the bottom, near the zipper, the fabric was also stained. Blood. She abruptly opened her backpack. "What is it?" Mark asked. Jessica didn't answer. Her hands were shaking, but she kept pulling things out one by one. T-shirt. Jacket. First aid kit. A plastic bag. Exhausted. It was immediately clear what was inside. Smell. Heavy, suffocating. Logan caught it, too. "What the fuck is that?" Jessica unwrapped the package without breathing. And she froze. Mark snatched it out of her hands. I unwound it to the end. In the glare of the lantern, it became visible. A piece of cloth. Dirty. Soaked in blood. But not just fabric. Sleeve. With a part of the arm inside. Jessica clapped her hand over her mouth. Logan slammed on the brakes, the car skidded, and it stopped sideways in the middle of the road. "Where did you get this in your backpack?" Jessica couldn't answer. She couldn't even remember when it got there. But one thing was clear. They weren't just watching. They left them a warning. The car was parked on an empty road, the engine was still running, but no one was moving. Mark was holding a piece of someone else's body in his hands, his fingers trembling as if it were white-hot steel. "That's impossible," Jessica muttered, still staring at the mutilated sleeve. Logan pressed the accelerator pedal to the floor. "We won't discuss it. We're just leaving." He didn't make it. Just as he was about to step on the gas, a sound was heard from the side. Twigs crackling. The rustle of footsteps. Jessica slowly turned to the window. The forest was dense and dark, but something was moving in it. "Fuck," Mark hissed. "It's them." Jessica frantically snapped her backpack shut and hugged it to her. A thud. From behind. Mark whirled around. Logan gripped the steering wheel so tightly that it felt like his skin was about to burst. The knock was repeated. But not from behind now. And on the side. On the roof. Someone was upstairs. Jessica shuddered, and at that moment the car lurched violently. It was as if someone had stepped from one side of the roof to the other. Logan didn't hesitate. He stepped on the gas sharply. The car lurched forward. A figure flashed by in the rearview mirror, but it was impossible to make out the details in the darkness. They didn't stop. Logan drove like he was being chased by death itself. The road took them to the highway, and finally, when the forest was far behind, he slowed down. They didn't talk. They just breathed. Alive. Jessica was still clutching her backpack tightly. "To the next town," Mark managed. "To the police." Logan nodded. But when they entered a small town and stopped at the first gas station, Jessica was the first to get out of the car. She couldn't breathe in the confined space. She took a couple of steps and suddenly felt that something was wrong. They're gone. They were far away. But the feeling wouldn't let go. She slowly turned her head towards the car. And I saw it. On the back window. Trace. It was as if someone had run their fingers over a fogged glass. But it wasn't just a stain. It was a word. "We see." A chill pierced her spine. "Logan." He looked at her. "What?" She raised her hand. She pointed at the glass. He got out of the car. I looked at it. Mark went out too. The three of them stood and watched. The letters were imprinted on the dirty glass, uneven but clear. "No," Logan muttered. Jessica opened her backpack with shaking hands. They could still smell it. But when she unwrapped the package, there was no hand there. Just a piece of old rag. soaked in blood. Mark recoiled. It can't be. Logan clenched his jaw. They knew what we'd find. They knew we'd be scared. Jessica closed her backpack. This is not a warning. She swallowed. It's an invitation. Logan turned away. We're leaving. He got into the car. Jessica and Mark got in too, but no one started the engine. In the distance, at the entrance to the city, several figures appeared in the lamplight. People. Without shoes. They just stood there. And they watched.